Hello and welcome to another edition of Spring Office Hours. My name is Dan Vega and I'm your host. Along with me, as always, is my good friend DaShaun. DaShaun, how are you doing today?
Wonderful. We're having a good day. We had a great webinar earlier. Things are moving forward. This community is doing great. Our ecosystem continues to move forward, and yeah, everything is continuing to work. Right, all of my tests over here are green, so I'm having a great day.
Yeah, we keep talking about what's new in Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6, and there's no shortage of excitement. As you said, we had a great webinar today. A whole bunch of people showed up for that. I mean, we keep talking about it, and people keep showing up for it. So either the topic must be really good, or we must be doing something right, or both.
Yeah, so today's, again, we're doing this every week, or we're trying to do it every week. Let us know where you're from. Drop us a note. If you have been sending email for stickers, you can continue to send those. Look for a email response. You'll get a response, and if you get a response on that email, that means your stickers are in the mail. So if you haven't got an email response yet, it's still on the way, but we're getting sticker requests from all over the world. One of the coolest things is when those requests come in days after the episode. Yeah, just exciting stuff. Stickers at springofficehours.io if you would like some stickers.
Awesome. And who wouldn't? These stickers are great. Cool. So we have an exciting episode, or at least I think so today. We are going to do a mailbag episode. We're going to answer questions. We like these episodes where we get to answer questions. We don't always get a ton of questions at once in the episode. So we've collected questions from all types of various sources and even past shows, and we're going to go through and answer those today. So do us a favor, go ahead and get your questions in. If you have questions, ask them. This is a great time to go ahead and get them in, because we'll try and get to those today as well. I love these episodes. And again, I've had a little bit of anxiety because I have these different mediums. Like we have like YouTube channels and Twitch and LinkedIn and Twitter, and I get questions from everywhere, which is great, but I'm like, I got to answer these somehow. So this is like a perfect place to go ahead and answer those questions.
It is. And I'm going to add, I'm probably not going to talk a whole lot about it. Maybe we'll do it on a later episode. But last week, one of the questions that came up on our stream is one where we said, hey, let's take that offline. And I'm happy, like goosebumps. I don't know if you guys can see those goosebumps. I got really excited because on Friday, I had a chance to sit down and pair with one of the people in the audience and yeah, take them, at least get them unlocked on, hey, here's how we do it. and it was using an older technology, these Spring web services, and a WSDL that wasn't quite formatted the right way, but we got through it, and it didn't take much. We are happy to take some of the thing offline and help you. We want to help you get forward.
Yeah, great. I think, I want to mention something too. I mentioned this in our webinar this morning. I've been doing some work on some videos last week on just Gradle VM in general, and just the amount of work that goes into like telling the Gradle VM, hey, these are the different classes that are part of my dynamic features that I'm using in my application. Just those little like hints and things that go into it. I didn't realize like how much work that was. And so I have a new appreciation for everything the Spring team did with Spring Boot 3 and all the work that went into making ALT and native compilation a reality. So hats off to the Spring team on that one.
Paul brings up a good question. It's maybe something we should address, having a Discord channel for Spring Office Hours. That might be a good idea, something we'd probably have to discuss with some other members of the team. Alexander is here. Alexander, who I got to pair with.
There it is.
In the airport. Yes.
Nice.
It was wonderful. I'm still excited that we're helping our audience move forward. It was special.
Yeah,
request real quick. Can you make a video about putting Spring Boot project with a database and some logging with Elasticsearch on a Docker container? Just a request.
So,
yes, bring those questions.
Yes, that's a lot of things. But I would say I would ask you what's your sticking point there? Because doing a Spring Boot project with a database and some logging on a Docker container, I've probably done a video on that at some point. So is Elasticsearch the problem? Like, what problems are you having with Elasticsearch? I guess I would ask it that way. How would you create a login system where user session is managed, but authorization is JWT? To expand further, I'm trying to design a system where user session is managed through cookies. I believe I got a similar question like this on Twitter, and it might be in one of our questions for today. DaShaun, you know the answer to that?
Yeah, I think we talked about it. Maybe it was on this show last week. The idea of my default pattern is I like to have that gateway that says, hey, are you authorized or not? Send it over to Spring Authorization Server, get that authorization, and then store that session using Redis as a session store for a distributed system, so that as I'm coming in, I'll have that cookie, but that session content is stored in Redis. That's kind of my default pattern. It's one that I see everywhere. It's super easy to implement. So that's my default answer.
Awesome. I like it. Ooh, let me jump on this one. We were just talking about this in the webinar today. So do you think virtual threads will obsolete reactive style mono-influx programming? So the short answer is no. I think there's still a world where both the like imperative programming style with Spring MVC and the reactive style with Spring Webflux are both still going to be needed. Now, virtual threads do solve one of the problems that reactive style programming, at least Webflux, solves, right? And which is that idea of this blocking mechanism happening and holding up a thread. So I'll go into a little bit more about that in a second, but no. So if you're still doing like reactive streams-based processing, Webflux is still going to be needed. But if all you're doing is you want to use reactive style or you want to use Webflux to get some performance benefits out of blocking operations like talking to a database, Project Loom is going to help us out there. Yeah, so I this comes up a lot, but I think the biggest gains are going to be in the Spring MVC world. If you're building an MVC app that talks to a database, that reads or writes from a file system, these are blocking operations. Currently, that is a one-to-one thread, so a JVM thread to an operating system thread. Virtual threads are going to help us in that situation. Pretty excited about that. There is a blog post over on spring.io/blog that walks you through how to use virtual threads in Spring Boot 3. You can do it now. It's a preview, but not much is going to change from Java 19 to Java 21 as far as how it works. What's there now is mostly what it's going to be. So you can check it out now and see if you like it.
Awesome.
The other thing that I think the really nice thing about it too is that there are no code changes for you, right? So in your MVC app, it stays the same. probably some configuration settings, but that's it.
Yeah. Sessions managed for logout purpose, but then authorization to access. Yes. SEU, James, that pattern still works, having that Redis so that you can do, expire session and log out those advanced, beyond that first step. Because one of the things with JWT is, how do you make it not valid? So that having that session managed is an important piece.
What do you find that, I'm just curious, my own question here for you, DaShaun, the when you have something like that, do you find like one pattern is maybe having shorter shorter times to validation? So my JWT, instead of having it valid for 24 hours, 40 hours a week, could I just have it like valid for like an hour and then it's basically invalidated? Or is that something you've seen being used like that as well?
Yeah, I've seen both approaches, and it depends. There are some cases where you don't want that token, that JWT, to be alive for very long, and then there's some cases where you do. You want that to live longer. If you've got millions of users, for example, and you don't want to be pounding some backend service, some authorization service, or some LDAP store too often, then you might want to move those concerns. So
cool.
It depends.
Cool.
Let's go. Oh, here's a great question. Do you have any tips for getting your favorite third-party libraries to provide hints for GraalVM native image? It is doable as a user of the library, but not the best experience. Thanks. I think what I hear is, how do I get those upstream libraries? How do I get them to help with this providing those hints? And you want to take that one?
Sure. Like I said, I just went through this on a particular project that I was working on. And, if any of those third-party libraries are using some dynamic features of the JVM, like reflection, like proxies, then this is something you're going to have to deal with. You may be able to build a native image, but then you go to try to run it and it doesn't work. And this is exactly why, because it's found a path that it didn't already anticipate. So to do so in GraalVM, so if you have the GraalVM JVM, there is a tracing agent. The tracing agent will then go ahead and look at all the possible paths when you go ahead and run that application. So let me run the application, provide it a path to run, and now it goes, oh, I see that path that you're trying to go down, and I'm going to go ahead and create the metadata that is going to be needed in the native executable. So it takes that metadata. Now when GraalVM builds that native executable, it uses that metadata along with it. So look at the GraalVM docs, look for the tracing agent. And in fact, if you want to check out my YouTube channel, I've just done a video on this. It is my latest video, so go ahead and check that out.
And once you've got that data, once you've got that metadata, those hints, then for your favorite library, create a PR. Create a PR, submit those as a PR to your favorite library, and help them pull it in upstream.
We should talk about that too. There is a pretty big project out there, right? This is because I know the Spring team has been one of the biggest contributors to this project. There's a GraalVM reachability metadata project or something like that. I'll have to find the exact repo, but there is something like that out there. So if you're using this popular library, here's some example of some metadata that you can go ahead and use in your project. And I believe you can also include it as part, like a dependency in, say, your Maven POM, and then instruct the GraalVM native builder plugin for like Maven to use that with it. So there's some cool stuff there. It is tricky. Like if you just try to build an image and you haven't done this before, the first time I ran across it, I'm like, oh, I see what's going on now. Like now this makes sense. So I would say what helped me was I was in this middle of this like big project and I was trying to understand it. I said, I gotta step back here. So I created a simple like hello world application. I did a simple reflection test, and then I go, okay, now this makes a little bit more sense. I see what's going on. Maybe do something like that to understand the concept before you try to integrate it into this like larger project that you're working on.
And I'll say this too, GraalVM is moving forward fast. This ecosystem is moving forward fast around GraalVM. So these projects literally daily, there's new metadata being added upstream into your favorite library. And the way that those hints are being provided for your libraries, your favorite library provider can look directly at the Spring documentation, the same way that Spring is implementing those hints into their libraries, into their framework, is the same way they've made it available to the rest of the ecosystem. So good questions. Back to this one. I've just got issues configuring properly Elasticsearch, communicating on Docker container. That's something that we can definitely do. Might not need a video, but we can definitely help out with that. You should send us reach out to us on Twitter. We can do the same thing that we did with Alexander. Let us know where you're at. Give us a GitHub repository, and I'll happily pair with you and help you get through that. Cool. Is there a migration guide for or from open tracing to micrometer tracing?
I don't know.
I don't think that there's any difference, but maybe I'm getting my terms confused. Ambu, thank you for joining us again, one of our regulars. That I don't think that there is a real migration. I think that micrometer's tracing implementation is compatible with open tracing, but I might be having some terms confused.
We will go ahead and do some further investigation into that. That is a good question. If you have some more kind of background on that, let us know.
Here's another one. Hey, on a previous live, you mentioned and advised us not to build our own Docker images. So do you have any tutorial about how to do it with Spring Boot plugin? Absolutely. We could do that today as a demo. Yes. Fantastic. We'll save that one.
And just to be clear, there's still a Docker image somewhere in the background.
An OCI image.
Something people smarter than us have written, and we don't have to deal with and maintain. You just don't want to start from scratch and go Google something and throw everything. You know, if you don't do this every day, you're gonna end up Googling some, copying and pasting some code in. You maybe not understand it. I sure as heck don't. And then you have to maintain this file that you don't understand in the first place, and maybe it's not efficient and doing the right things. So that's the reason that we say don't build your own Docker images. There are things out there to help you with this.
Tyler.
Let's go. I like it.
Let's see. I'm pretty sad with the micrometer tracing in the reactive stack. I hope that replacing Spring Cloud Sleuth will be plug and play on Spring Boot 3.x, but guess that's not yet auto-configured. Well, the Spring Cloud Sleuth has been brought into micrometer. So there's not really a Spring Cloud Sleuth addition. It's just part of the micrometer core, right. I believe. So you get it out of the box. It's just been basically renamed and thrown into micrometer. So there's not a separate dependency that's necessary when you're on Spring Boot 3.x.
Yeah, and I haven't tested this particular path out yet, but so I know the web client underneath the hood is collecting metrics and collecting distributed metrics. So if I'm calling service A and service B and then calling service C with both of those responses, that's all being collected. So I imagine this has to work. So I'm curious to know what problems you're having there, if any.
Awesome. Hey, asking for resources. Do you have a reference, a good resource to learn about Modulus on Spring? Best place to start, spring.io. That's the best place to start. Now that Spring Modulus package is now, I think it's still in experimental mode, but it's been upstream. So what that's doing is actually providing some guardrails on how you deliver your repository. And those guardrails, if they're followed, it's going to allow you to split apart that repository into microservices at some later time as you add more people to the team, etc. Good question, and I don't know the answer to this one. Will reactive programming model run on top of virtual threads instead of the netty event loop? So we can use both reactive and blocking in the same application instead of deciding which stack to use early.
I don't think so. I never like to go ahead and just answer, definitively without knowing the answer to it. But I don't think so, because everything that I've heard, especially from Jürgen, who knows more than anyone, has basically said, hey, if you're using Spring MVC, you're using blocking technology like talking to a database, then this is going to work for you. If you're using, some CPU intense application, virtual threads is not really going to help you in any way. So I don't think that you would use it in the same way in a reactive app, because again, virtual threads are solving one of the things that reactive's already solved for you. So in that case, you don't need virtual threads. Just use reactive.
Can we ask anything about Spring? Yes.
Yep.
Yes. That's what we're here for. And if we don't know the answers, we have Slack. We'll ask. Yes, absolutely. Bring your questions. We're putting them up on the screen. We're putting them up on the video so that we can take them offline and answer them at a later time in case we don't get them today. But yes. Hey, another great question. We hear this all the time. What do you think about Red Hat Quarkus? Copy of Spring Boot Solutions? Well, not really a copy of. It's a different approach. Quarkus was able to start without having the decade plus of backwards compatibility that it needed. It was focused really on that startup time. And yeah, not necessarily a copy of, but it plays well. Quarkus does leverage a lot of the libraries and stuff from the Spring ecosystem. So you'll be hard pressed to find something with Quarkus that's not referencing something from the Spring ecosystem. So yeah, we see that all the time. Yeah, you've got choices.
I'll say this too. Go into any programming community, and if you only find one framework doing one thing, then it's not going to be around that long. So options are a good thing. And I think frameworks in any ecosystem learn from each other. I'm sure there's things that the Spring team has picked up from another project. I'm sure the other project picks up things from the Spring team. That's part of evolving as a framework, evolving as an ecosystem, and providing solutions to problems that your customers need. So yeah, there's room for everyone, and I think everyone's doing a great job. So
yeah, a lot of the use cases where you might have chosen Quarkus in the past have been addressed by Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3. So yeah, but you have choices. Is there a way to automate generating metadata for Gradle VM? Yes, we already talked about that. And
yep, go ahead and check out my latest video. I kind of walked through that. So
yes,
youtube.com/@DanVega. If you don't know, now you know.
For my next project, how do I choose between Spring Data JPA and JDBC template approach to interact with databases? What is your recommendation if you prefer one style? Why?
I'll jump on this. So there's even another one, Spring Data JDBC. So JDBC template and Spring Data are two different things. So if you go over to start.spring.io and just choose the dependency Spring JDBC, this is what gives you the JDBC template out of the box, right? So you get things like, you get this template, which is an abstraction on top of the JavaX SQL stuff that we've all kind of used since day one. And this is a better abstraction, but it's still manual. Like you're writing all of your queries, you're writing, hey, I go ahead and persist this operation to the database. There's a whole bunch there. JDBC template for me is better than JDBC operations in, say, a normal Java program. But the next level of abstraction is Spring Data. And the two popular choices in Spring Data are JPA is by far the most popular. This is using an ORM underneath the hood. By default, it's Hibernate. So this is great. Also could be a little bit of a learning curve if you never used something like a Hibernate. Spring Data JDBC gives you a lot of that same abstraction without the learning curve of something like Hibernate. Now, there is some differences into like how it works underneath the hood compared to something like JPA. So there are, as always, there are trade-offs. There are times to use one or another. I would say take a look at it. If you're brand new to Spring JDBC template, start there, because this will give you an appreciation for, I've got to write all these queries and do all these things manually. Now let me look at the next abstraction on top of that, which might be something like Spring Data JDBC. Oh, look, I just created an interface. I have this repository and I get all these things out of the box for free. So I would say start there. That's kind of a natural progression which people take.
It depends, because my default is none of the above. My default is Spring Data Redis, because I have so many data models built into one, and that's kind of how I start. So yeah, it depends. Now, this is a question of which OAuth Flow would you use for a system where users register their accounts in a web-based application, but then use their accounts to access an API on the same system?
So when you say users register their accounts in a web-based application, so for me, the web-based application is still, I sign up and I'm persisting that information somewhere. That information is that is like the authority system. This is where all users are going to authenticate, right? So for me, if that application and the API are the same thing, that's one thing. If we're storing a bunch of users in one central place and then we have different APIs, now we could talk about, something like an authorization server at like a gateway level. So when you say a user registers their account in a web app, yes, they're on a web app, but that is getting persisted somewhere. And, it could be in a Spring Boot application. If it's a monolithic application and the API is in there, then you could build it all into Spring Security's out-of-the-box OAuth 2 resource server functionality. But if it's, hey, I need one authentication layer for many APIs to access different clients, that I would take a look at like something like Spring Authorization Server for.
I'm going to go ahead and throw this up there. These are some of the questions that I want to come back to later. But just that model, my default model, it looks like this, where I have a gateway that's standing in front of all of my things. And if I come in and I'm a new user, I need to register. That registration of that user is going to end up in a user store. And when I authenticate against that authorization server, I'm authenticating and I get a new session so that I can be accessing all of those other protected APIs that are sitting behind the gateway. So my gateway is going to check, hey, does this user have access to go to this gateway? If yes, then I will forward that call.
And the great thing about this approach is now this scales out. So whatever client is registering, this could be a user on a web app or somebody on iOS or Android or some IoT device. And now this scales out to whatever API. So if we add a bunch of APIs down there, this could be any API. They're all checking with the same place. We've done authentication in one single place. We're not going to replicate something as important as security, 15 times, right? Like we have it in one place, and now all these APIs are basically authenticating against that gateway.
Hopefully that helps.
Hopefully.
Yes. Is there a way to implement Redis locking using Spring Data Redis rather than using Redis lock? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm embarrassed.
Do not be embarrassed. You cannot know everything.
But that's a great question, Jay. I'm going to take that offline. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to reach out to my friend, not on the Spring team, but on the Redis team, Brian Samboden. That's who I'm going to reach out to answer that question. Again, I don't always have the answers. We don't always have the answers, but we have Slack. We know how to get a hold of it. So yeah, you're going to have to come back and no, I'll find out the answer. What's a good way to do that? All right. Yes, there are much more things to learn, especially from June. But this is a great way. Start here. This is a great place to learn.
And I will say, not just for a junior dev. This is for everybody. I know you're overwhelmed as a junior dev, but I promise you, us who have been doing this for 20 years are also overwhelmed. And I would say my biggest piece of advice to that is be okay not knowing everything. You are not going to learn everything. Just try to understand what you need to know to accomplish what you're working on today.
This one is addressable, Alexandru. The problem with my chronometer on Reactive is based on my latest experience trying to log a message in Spring Cloud Gateway, which didn't show any trace ID on the configured log pattern. We can definitely help you out. This is where, just like I did with Alexander last week, what I'd like for you to do is provide us a GitHub repo of whatever you can public. Shoot it to me as a direct message on Twitter or to Dan. We can help you work through that. But this is something that I know that we can help you get through so you can get tracing using that pattern that we just looked at, that consistent pattern, and have that traceability across all of your application, your distributed application, in one consistent way across all of your different components. Here we go. Hi, Dan. Do you know any resources on how to use Azure AD as SSO with Spring and Struts 2 applications?
Ooh, Struts.
Wow. This is the second time in a week that I've had people ask questions about Struts 2. This is amazing.
Man, I started out on Struts 22 years ago, so it's been a while with Struts. I don't know any off the top of my head. I know with something like SSO, you can take a look at Spring Cloud Gateway. I know the commercial edition has a lot of really nice SSO features built in. I don't know to what extent that connects to Azure AD. I'm sure there's a way to do it. But you had something?
Yeah, we can take Spring Authorization Server. I'll actually bring this back up. I can take Spring Authorization Server just like I have here, and that backing user store can be Azure AD. So I can, again, use the same pattern. And once I've authenticated with my resources through Azure AD, then my session can handle the authentication so I can access the rest of my application. And I believe that we could do that exact same thing, whether it's Spring or it's some Struts 2 application that's sitting behind that gateway. So yeah, this is something definitely worth taking a look at and worth, attempting at least. Here we go. What is your take on using TinyLog with Spring Boot rather than using Logback? I've got none. I have no experience on using TinyLog with Spring Boot rather than using Logback.
Yeah, me either. I would say take a look at it, and if there's a reason to move towards it in your project, then that's something to evaluate. I haven't either. So,
let's see who is the other question? One of the other patterns and things that I like to do with the way of logging, or by the way of logging, is formatting my logging in JSON so that I can consume it by something that can easily search JSON, something in memory like Redis or Elasticsearch. So those are some of the other options. But yeah, don't, if the logging is a problem, and if you can find some benefits by switching that thing, again, you have that flexibility with the framework. There is no hard set way of implementing these things. They're auto-configured out of the box, and that's the benefit. But you can always make those changes. You don't have to auto-configure logging to use Logback. You can switch it out. So that's one of the flexibilities of the framework.
Yeah, and Logback is configured for you out of the box, but there are ways to kind of change that configuration. If you need to like change Logback to do something specific, there are ways to configure it as well. So,
all right, so we got more info. So Ambu, Open Tracing project got discontinued, and it's now Open Telemetry Tracing. Some of my current projects are using Open Tracing. You're not the only group person developer that we've heard this migrating to my Chronometer Observation API to help instrument in trace. Yes. So I do have another customer that I'm working with closely that is dealing with this exact same thing. Thank you for the additional context. And that's something that I'm going to add to my little list to bring back. And it's something I won't be able to get to today, but it's something I'll definitely bring back to the show later. Open tracing to open. Sorry, I'll write the rest of that later. I've seen many people use Spring Data JPA and Hibernate incorrectly, which is causing many confusions and issues. I would take JDBC template any day over Hibernate if you know SQL. That's a
great point. Yep. I mean, again, play to your team or your strengths and weaknesses. I mean, I would not introduce JPA and Hibernate on a team full of developers who don't know JPA and Hibernate. Now, if you have a huge project that already uses it and you need some developers to get up to speed on it, sure, that's one case. But if you're starting something new and you have a group that doesn't have any experience with Hibernate, absolutely. But I would say JDBC template, sure, but Spring Data JDBC gives you that same benefit of the Spring Data repositories without the overhead of Hibernate. So if that's something you're interested, take a look at that.
Yep. Dan, Maven or Gradle, and why?
I'm a Maven person. I don't mind. This is weird because I'm a big Groovy fan. I love Groovy. I've used Gradle before. I just find that for me, when I look at the statistics, a lot of what the community is using is Maven. So I write demos, I write tutorials, I write things for the community to consume. And if 75, I don't know, I'm just making this number up. If 75% of the community is using Maven, then I'm going to write my demos and of my code in Maven, because if not, then I'm going to get 20, all the questions are going to be, how do I do this in Maven? Because I use Maven, not Gradle. So that's why I use it a lot, just because of the types of things that I'm building. I will say that for Gradle, one of the things that, again, I'm a big fan of Groovy. One of the things that, if you have to go off the path and like write a plugin to do something, gosh, it's so much easier to do in Gradle. But I just haven't run across that because the things that I'm building don't kind of cater to that. But in your organization, if you have to do special things in your build or in your pipeline, or, as part of your process, like Gradle's a great option because it's much easier to kind of write out those different plugins.
I'm not a Groovy aficionado, or I'm not an expert. My default is Maven for a few reasons. The things that I got with Gradle was the daemon that sped up some of my processes locally, my inner loop development. But I can get a lot of that with Maven D, MVND. Look for that, which also starts up a daemon and also can improve that inner loop development cycle. Another thing is the schema. With Maven, I have a known schema. I can make changes to that. So I can go across all of my projects, all my Maven projects, and I can make an update to something like add this dependency. I know exactly where it goes because of the schema, and I can move forward, and I can do automation to do that. So again, the Gradle automation, building things for your pipeline, plugins made easy. But I use Spring Shell to build the same types of things that are going to modify my projects, and they can also be a part of my CI/CD pipelines, my path to production supply chains. Oh, look at this. Oh, we're always happy to hear this. I might be late, just thanking Dan for the wonderful videos, tutorials, and making me feel at ease with Spring Security. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's awesome to hear.
Can I have a calendar schedule reminder for your future live sessions? That's great. I suppose we could maybe throw these out there and schedule a bunch in advance. We're going to try to hit this same time, same channel every Tuesday. Sometimes we're both traveling or we're not able to deliver. And I'll also say that I'm still poking Dan, so maybe we can get another episode going at a different time during the week so we can kind of hit some of these different time zones.
Jay, there's a real simple solution to this. If you were to subscribe to our YouTube channels, so youtube.com/@DanVega, youtube.com/@DaShaun, if you just subscribe to those are going to pop up in your feed. So I would do that first.
That's great.
And then check out springofficehours.io. There's the page. When we schedule one, it'll show up there.
That's Jay saying thanks to a previous question, but we'll use it here. Here we go. I thought Keycloak was the standard regarding IAM on Java ecosystem. I find it a bit complicated though, but what's your advice on which stack to choose for auth and user registration systems? It depends. It depends.
I don't have a ton of experience with Keycloak, so that's just me. Obviously, our go-to for everything is Spring Authorization Server here, so I would take a look at that.
Oh, here's easy peasy. How can I make a Spring MVC app with Timeleaf and Spring Security to redirect to the previous URL after the login? I can specify a default success URL, but it kind of requires a constant URL.
Couldn't this be a configuration?
I see. So I think what I'm hearing is, hey, if I go to some page and that page requires me to log in, once I log in, please send me back to the page that I was trying to get to.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that we do have a pattern that explains that in our guides.
Yeah, so that would be in the request. So you would grab that from the request URL. So I think that would be in somewhere in there.
Yep.
I'd have to look though. Yeah, it's been a while since I've used Timeleaf in kind of the MVC world. Everything I've done over the last 4 years has been APIs.
Is there an easier solution in Spring, recent Spring release? I don't know that's going to change a whole lot. It might be easier to implement the Spring configuration, the Spring security configurations with Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6. But yeah, I think the same pattern is going to exist. I don't think there's any shortcuts. But implementing the code for Spring security, I think might be a little bit easier this time around. Face, fuchsia, tongue out. All right. Oh, here. Which do you prefer? Like, we have options. You have all these options. Which HTTP client do you prefer? REST template, Apache HTTP web client?
What's the context of the application I'm in? So if I'm in an imperative application, I have no problem using REST template. I know a lot of people, for whatever reason, see that REST template is no longer being worked on. So like there's no evolution of the APIs in REST template, and think that it's deprecated. Like it's not deprecated, it's just not being worked on anymore. And I don't think like that's not an issue. So if I'm in an MVC application, I'm using REST template with an asterisk, hold on. If I'm in a WebFlux application, I am using web client with the asterisk. Hold on. If I'm in a normal Java application, I use HTTP client. But in Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3, my default is now the web client because I'm using HTTP interfaces. So you get to declare an interface, and we will basically turn that into an implementation at runtime. We use the web client underneath the hood, but then based on the return type, it could either be blocking or non-blocking. So now these days, I'm using HTTP interfaces, which uses web client underneath the hood.
Yeah. I lost the context on this one, Paul. Connection LDAP, I'm assuming the authorization server back to the Azure AD. But yeah, you have options. Do you guys prefer returning response DTOs or wrapping the same DTO in a response entity? We've talked about this a few times on the stream.
Sorry.
It depends.
So the response entity, yeah. So I've done a video on this. The response entity, if you're going to make changes to the response, I want to change the status code, I want to change the headers, then use a response entity. If all you're doing is returning the object unchanged, no headers, no changing the status, but even in the status, there's ways to change it via annotation now. For me, there's no reason to wrap it in a response entity. That's just my opinion. I've done a video on this if you want to check it out.
Awesome. I'm going to keep on going. Repo demo of session management for Spring Security. Stay tuned. I'll get something out that'll kind of match this reference architecture.
Yeah.
We'll share that.
Yeah. And I know we're doing, we have a call either this week or next week. We're going to be doing some more stuff with Gateway. I would say in the meantime, look over on GitHub Spring projects. Every Spring project like Spring Security has a samples directory.
Yep.
I don't know off the top of my head because there's so many samples out there. Maybe there's one in one of those directories there. So.
I do not know if this has been asked. Say you have a backend service with service 1, service 2. Any need to introduce Spring Security authentication managers downstream for each? No, we have, again, I'm going to circle back to this pattern. What we can do is on these guys, is it just at resource? Is that the annotation where, hey, I need you to be authenticated before you have access to this. And that's all I need to add is that annotation, I believe it's just at resource. That'll say, hey, yep, I need to be authenticated. So I don't need to add any Spring Security filters or extra stuff to all of my stuff. I can, by configuration, I can say, hey, I need a token that has been signed by this authorization server in order to access this API.
Yep. And then on the authorization server level, you register each of the clients. Here are the different clients that can register with this authorization server.
Hopefully that answered that. Yes. Boop. All right. And any RSocket UI to backend famous projects? This is a great question. And tomorrow on Code around the same time, Mario Gray is going to be walking through converting some HTTP clients to RSocket. And we're going to use that declarative approach, the same thing that we just talked about, to do RSocket clients. So yeah, you should come and check out our code session tomorrow, which is actually a 2-hour session where we're actually going to be doing live coding and pairing with Mario Gray tomorrow. Code episode 68.
This is the Mario Gray?
The Mario Gray, who has still not been on our show.
All right. Yeah, we got to fix that. And I'm going to be joining you guys tomorrow to watch that.
This is great. Yes, Alexander. DaShaun, can you share a calendar or something on the next conferences that you are attending in Europe, along with their scheduled speakers? This is a project that Dan and I started talking about, and maybe like episode 5 or 6, where we have an idea of where we're going to be. This whole like the conference approvals and not. Alexander, I'm going to be in your area. I will make that public. I will push that out onto my website, but also on the Tanzu Developer Center. Let me pull that up. There is a way to find out where we're going to be. I'm going to pull that.
I didn't even know this.
Yeah. Well, not everybody, but a lot of us are already doing this. So if I go and I look at DaShaun, for example, let's see. I haven't updated in a while, but you can see, hey, I'm going to be here in Tel Aviv. It's just upcoming appearances. This is something that some of us are doing. So that might be your best place is for our team, Tasha's team, Team Tasha. This is where you want to be. I'll put that link in the chat. This is a great place to go to find out where we're going to be.
Yeah, it's been on my list to update that page for a while too. So
thank you, Alexander. Again, thanks from Jay. And thank you for all the videos which make our developers' lives much easier and happier. Thank you, Pat, for joining. And we do appreciate the feedback. Do you guys remember the type of projects you built to get your first dev job or internship?
Whew, that was a long time ago. I don't know if you could tell by the video, but I've been doing this for a while. So I believe that like the first type of projects I did, it was funny. I don't know if I've ever told this story, but one of the first real projects I got was in a Yahoo chat room. I don't know if you remember those. In a Yahoo chat room, I got a gig for a very large luggage e-commerce company. And we ended up building this whole thing out. It was crazy. But I think it was based off of just at the time looking at job boards going, what are people hiring for? What are the things that I want to do with my career? So I would look out and say, oh, okay, they're looking for experience with this. I would just build out simple applications that kind of reflected that. So I would say if that's what you're looking to do, you know, we have GitHub these days. Make sure you have a GitHub repository or a GitHub account. Create some repositories of different things that you're working on to kind of showcase your work. And yeah, this is actually one of the questions we have in our mailbag. So we'll get some more into that in a second. But yeah, find things that if it's specifically to get a job, what are people hiring for? Let me start building things around the type of job that I'm trying to get. And then just add those to your GitHub repository.
All right. Mine was DaShaun.com. In 1995, not a lot of developers had their own website, and that one nailed it. So, but now you've got GitHub. You got lots of ways of making your work visible.
That's a really good point. I forgot. I mean, I don't know how I forgot about that, but yes, early on, I built my own website. I used some open source software to build a blog, and then I would write about the things that I was like running into every day, and having to teach that back to other people is one way that I end up learning a lot. So yeah.
All right, we got some comments about Maven versus Gradle. I get it. Yep. Here's a good question. Maybe not the right spot here, but yeah, who is a developer advocate and should I become one? I love my job. I am a developer advocate. Dan, also a developer advocate. I love my job. This is the best job I've ever had. So yeah, it depends.
Yeah. So now that I can look back on my career, it makes sense. I would say early on in my career, even before I was a technical like support specialist too. I would work with the engineers. I was creating videos to teach other people like how to do something. So I didn't have to answer this question over and over again. I would say to be a developer advocate, you have to be a developer first. So be a developer, get in, learn your craft, get as good at that as you can. If you find along the way that you enjoy blogging or creating videos, not to like make a name for yourself, but because you like really enjoy teaching people. And for me, it was, I don't want someone to have to like waste 6 hours of their life going through the same problem that I just did. I want somebody else to be able to just read my blog post and go through it. If you find that to be a passion, if that's something that you enjoy as much as developing, this is a great world we live in now where this is a particular job title that you can get. So if you enjoy the intersection of writing code and teaching and helping people, it's a great job to get into.
You can be a developer advocate without having that title. One of the best ways to find out if you want to be a developer advocate is to start being a developer advocate in your org, in your community, wherever you're at. Take it for a spin. Go and be a developer advocate for whatever your passion is. That's my advice on going down that career. You can be a developer advocate without having the title. I've been a Spring developer advocate long before I was a part of this team.
Yep. Same.
What's the best garbage collector for Spring Boot run on Kubernetes for API with SQL requests, 1,000 per request, best content reduction tool? Big question. The best answer that I have here, this is real. You've got to be able to take your tests and try all of them for your workload. There is no way that we can answer that without knowing what your workload is doing, without having your tests in your harness. You've got to take the time to automate that process to say, hey, let me try it with this. Let me try it with parallel. Let me try it with this. And go and run your tests and make a decision based on the data instead of some opinion. That's my advice. What do you recommend? Hystrix, Resilience4j, Sentinel?
I don't have much experience there. So.
It depends. It depends. How can we enable a resource server to use multiple OAuth 2 providers? Concretely, I want resource server to accept codes from 2 different authorization servers, GitHub and my custom auth server. I can do this. So you can authenticate from with a GitHub login or a Google login. I can do all of that via authorization server. And the token that's being authenticated or authorized against your resource server is the one that you get from the authorization server. So you can have that interface written so that you can authenticate, but the token that's delivered, I can go get my token from Google or from GitHub, and then I can convert that token and say, hey, here's the token that I'm going to sign. And I'm going to say, I validated that authentication from that third party service and now use that internally.
Yeah, so I know there's built-in OAuth 2 support in Spring Security. So if you wanted to have like a form login and provider like GitHub and Google, you could do that right out of the box with Spring Security. So that's very easy. And I think, there's some examples out there on that.
What is your prediction for the future of Spring Native with Gradle VM? Any hopes or wishes? That not every workload is going to get benefits from being on Spring Native on Gradle VM. I can see from this massive ecosystem, I can already see customers, friends, community that is getting massive benefits from it, and it's going to continue to move forward. And even if the Spring team stopped doing anything today, the team behind Gradle VM is continuing to move forward. We already addressed the questions. The rest of the ecosystem and libraries are continuing to add more metadata to make their libraries compatible with Gradle VM going forward. I don't see it stopping anytime soon. So for 2023, I see big things around the Spring ecosystem and Gradle VM.
Yeah, and let's be clear, Spring Native is no longer a thing. Spring Native was the project that we were using before Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6 came along. Now it's just kind of the AOT stuff is built into those.
Are there any advantages to choose Azure Spring App in production? And what is the difference between behind the scenes with Azure App Service? The answer's like, this is great question. It's like, hey, I've got a couple of different ways where I can deploy my Spring App. Why would I choose Azure Spring App or Azure Spring App for enterprise over something just like Azure App Service where I can just deploy a container image? Why would I make that decision?
Yeah, I don't know the difference between Azure Spring App and Azure App Service. I've used the Azure, was it Spring Apps for, what is the product?
ASA and ASAE, Azure Spring Apps and Azure Spring Apps Enterprise.
ASA, yes. So I've used ASA, at least in some demos. I don't have workloads in production there. But what I really appreciated with going through that process and learning about the services was just how like little I needed to know. The idea with a lot of these services, including ASA, is let's let the developers focus on writing code and let some service handle all of those workloads for us and do the things that it needs to do. I'm not a DevOps person. I don't understand some of that stuff. That's not what I want to spend my time doing. So I let ASA kind of do that for me. So I enjoyed just how easy it was to get set up and automate all of the things that I might need to do in production. So.
I'll add to that. Azure Spring Apps has a bunch of integrations out of the box where Azure App Service says, hey, go run my image on some container platform. Behind the scenes, there's tons of differences. One I think is Kubernetes, and it's got tons of build service under the covers. So that idea of the container that's running my application in Azure App Service, you've got to decide, you've got to re-upload, and you've got to manage the container that's running your application. over an Azure Spring App, there's a build service behind it. So if a CVE comes in, that Azure Spring App service knows it can update your application at runtime. So it's kind of a plus over here on the Azure Spring App side. And Azure Spring App for Enterprise has even more under the covers. So yes, there's definitely differences. If I can, I'm going to lead into Azure Spring Apps by default, because it gives me that, here's my app, go run it. I don't really care, but I get all the extra bells and whistles, the insights, the logging, the metrics, etc.
Yep.
I don't have to figure any of it. I just get it out of the box.
Yep.
Here's a great question. Redis OM Spring versus Spring Data Redis. This question is very similar to the Spring Data JPA, Spring Data JDBC, or other, right? Very similar question. It depends on where you are at. So I've got some demos in my GitHub repository around Spring Data Redis, and I'm working on delivering a new one on Redis OM for Spring that'll include the native, that'll include the stuff that Brian Zamboden has just pushed out to give it that native support. So stay tuned. Any alternatives for Swagger API docs? I ran into Stack Overflow saying that it's not available for Spring Boot 3. I don't know about that. I think I know what they're talking about. I think this is like, hey, can I automatically generate the Swagger API docs from some interface? There's a project out there. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but there's also alternatives. I'm a big fan of Spring REST docs. There's been a lot of content from me and Mario over the past few weeks. I've got demos around that, but Spring REST docs is test-driven documentation that can provide you the same types of output, not consumed as OpenAPI or Swagger downstream, but it can provide you that same interface that you can validate. You can see an example, a working example of your API working, the rest, the inputs and outputs, response and requests, etc. I'm a big fan. That's test-driven documentation. The other TDD can be delivered with Spring REST docs.
Great.
Oh, we had suggestion for future video. Can we write tests, unit or integration coming from a junior dev? Spring REST docs. Yes, check out some of the last 2 code episodes over on Tanzu.tv. All right, let me see. I'm going to get caught up. Man, we had such great questions. We've got nothing else but questions all day.
Well, this is really good because now next week is weekend schedule for right now is going to be mailbag day.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. Is there a solution for client notification push rather than using WebSockets? For client notification push rather than using WebSockets?
I don't know.
I might want more info.
I don't know.
Yeah, we have RSocket. Yeah, we have other details. We have other implementations that we can do. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna do multiplexing, you're gonna use a WebSocket. So yeah, I don't know of another way to do that.
Dan, queuing this one up for you. Your opinions on using ChatGPT for searching Spring documentation and articles about best practices.
I have 2 videos coming out this week on ChatGPT and Spring. So yeah, I would say it's a great tool. You'd be foolish not to take advantage of it while you can, especially like at a free tier. It's going to be paid very soon. But I would say tread lightly. Every answer that you get out of ChatGPT is not definitive. It's not the right answer. The other thing to remember is the data set that ChatGPT 3 is currently run on is up to the end of 2021. So anything after 2021, it can't pull from. And so there are probably new ways to do things, new techniques, better ways to solve a problem. And that's not part of its result set. So I would say it's a very good tool to get a starting point. How do I create a REST API in Spring Boot? Okay, here are the steps. Okay, I'm going to follow those steps and do it. I would not generally rely on it to just say, spit out a whole bunch of code. I'm going to use this and push this into production. That I would not do, but it is a really good place to start. It's also a great place to, one thing I've used as a learning tool is like paste some code in there and go, please explain this code to me. Like, I don't understand this code snippet. And it will walk through and kind of, spit out a bunch of really good information about why this is useful or what this is actually doing. So I would say use it. It's a tool in your tool belt, but don't rely on it as like the de facto, this is an answer.
What kind of qualification would it take to contribute to an open source project that Spring One or VMware is working on? Or any project. I have a basic understanding of Spring Boot, and I'm still a learning student. I'm still a student. It doesn't matter. There's all sorts of ways to contribute. Use the latest as one. Take something that's new, provide feedback on it. Find a bug in something that's a milestone or a snapshot release. Find a bug. Contribute that as an issue in GitHub. That's all it takes. You don't have to have some certain level of experience. It can be documentation. It can be just taking it for a spin and providing feedback on yes, it worked or no, it didn't. There's tons of ways to get started. Is GraalVM ready for production apps? Absolutely. GraalVM has been around for a while and is absolutely ready for production apps. Is Project Reactor going to take advantage of virtual threads? Is there any advantage to be gained at all?
We answered this earlier. No, I don't think so.
Hey guys, I want to ask something. I use JPA repository, but don't want to use, for example, find by ID prefix. I want to manipulate and filter data using Java 8 streams. Is it good performance?
That would be up to you to find out. Yeah, I mean, if you're streaming something, you're essentially saying, I only want this much data. So yeah, I would say that's a good performance saying, hey, just give me what I want.
I'd also like to add we have projections as an approach that you can use that doesn't require the streams. It may use the streams behind the scenes, but yeah, look at the projections capabilities of Spring Data JPA. Hey, Dan, I found you on Twitter feed and realized you are one of the main sources of my Spring knowledge long back when I started learning Spring. Thanks for the awesome tutorials and good vibes.
That is awesome. Thank you for making my day, Coding Cloud. I appreciate that.
How would you test Spring Boot app with Kafka, listeners, producers, etc.?
I would be using test containers. That's my first go-to is, hey, I don't want to replicate some system using some stub or dummy thing. Like I want to test the real thing. So I would use test containers, and that way you don't have to use the actual like thing from test or dev2 or whatever instance your company has set up. You can use a real lightweight solution right on your machine. So that's where I would probably start.
When building a social network project and saving reactions for posts, comments, reposts in a single table using Hibernate inheritance, what could be potential downsides? We're going to run into a lot. How are you going to pull those out? Performance is one.
For sure.
How fast the blocking on a RDB, a relational database might be a problem. So because you said Hibernate, that's where I went. Like, hey, there's other problems that just go along with that relational database. So again, when I'm hearing this, one of those things, I know that those before us, maybe you've heard of Facebook. I know they've got a big social network. They do not use a relational database to handle those types of things, nor does Twitter. There are different patterns. There's different models for your persistent store. I'm a big fan of Redis. I'm a big fan of the ORM. And you have some more options that are going to avoid some of that. Some of the problems that you find with relational database systems. But it depends on your scale, right? If there's only 5 users or 500 users, maybe those types of things aren't going to be a concern.
Right. And if you're using a relational database, then use a relational database as it's meant to be. Put these things in different tables, use indexes. I would say start there. If you're not already farther looking out to your 100,000 users, that can, data structures, those can always change later. If you want to start out with a relational database and you have 5 users right now, go ahead and do that. But take advantage of what the database is that you're using. And in this case, like using indexes, you're going to have to look out for things in JPA, like being able to, lazy load things. That comes with understanding, how Hibernate's working underneath the hood. I would say one thing is always turning on some of the debugging features in something like JPA, seeing the output of your data, of your SQL queries, getting a list of those queries. Now you can take those queries, put them into an execution plan on the database side and see if those are working for you. So that's where I would start.
Is Redis good for storing images? I know it's not the right form, but of course it's the right form. Are you familiar with anyone using Redis to store images? I used to work for Redis. Yes, you can absolutely do that, but it depends. It depends on what you're doing. For things like iDynamic, if I've got maybe a badge that I'm displaying on my application, and that badge is being created dynamically or updated dynamically, yes, I'm going to store that in my Redis. I could store it in my session store, but I can use it as Redis. I can speed up that performance, and if I'm scaling, if performance matters, then Redis is a great solution. But it depends, right? There's size constraints. The largest image you'd be able to store in something like Redis would be like 512 megabytes, but I do not recommend storing 512 megabyte images in Redis. All right. I think we got some help here around the Spring docs. Any idea why VMware archived Octant? Is there a new Tanzu project replacing it? No idea. No idea. I do not know the answer to that. Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to go for the answer to that. I do know the author of Octant. I could ask perhaps, but the original author is no longer at VMware. So yeah, we'll see if we can find out about that. Octant is a great tool. It's worked. It's awesome. And yeah, I think you still use it. I think it still works. Spring Dock Swagger for Spring Boot 3. Spring Dock Swagger for Spring Boot 3. Yeah, there is a way of connecting. There's a third-party library. The last I checked, it was not updated to use Spring Boot 3. I was able to go in and make some changes, but I did not upstream those changes. But yeah, I think there's anytime we should have some way of delivering the Swagger API out of a Spring REST docs. How can I handle large file transfer to Azure Blob Storage S3 bucket using Spring Boot 3? There's definitely an example of that. I think I even have an example of that in my repository. So I'm gonna try to rush through. We're way over time today. Lots of great questions. Hey, great show. Thank you. Some feedback. Use ChatGPT to get relevant application properties info. Can I use Node to install some JavaScript libraries in Spring MVC? Yes. I have an example of that. Let me put that URL up. I'd like to use the Maven front-end plugin to install Node and NPM, etc.
Big fan.
For my projects. What did you say?
Big fan. Yep, I do the same. So I have examples of that on my GitHub as well.
Any opinion on package by layer versus package by feature?
So this one is one of the ones I got your question. It is in our mailbag for today. I want to hold off on that because he had a very, very detailed question around this. I'm sorry we're not going to get to that today, but that is the first question on the list for next week in our mailbag.
NPM, sorry, not Node, same. Maven front-end plugin, you can do that. I do have a repository. Look for Calendar UI in my GitHub repository. It's a recent one using Spring Boot 3 and using Vaadin. You can see how I'm loading NPM and Node with that plugin. Thank you both. I appreciate all of your efforts, and we appreciate you. Thank you for joining. Does the Spring team have plans to support AI projects like deep learning for J? Man, great question. Stay tuned. One of the things that I'm working on behind the scenes is I'm using JSR 381. It is possible to leverage some of these external projects. I don't know if there's any plans from the Spring team to add support or add a framework around these other existing projects. But there is work from the ecosystem around making some of these things more Java native. And I've got some work coming soon showing how you can do that with JSR 381 and Spring Boot. Spring Kafka versus Spring Pulsar. Oof, that's a tough question. It's too hard to answer right now, but you should check out code episodes. Hey, we appreciate it. We'll be tuning in next week. Absolutely. Yep. Thank you so much. Am I almost down? Hey, what's the best solution for returning error message from backend? Invalid email. Passes message in header, creates some custom response or something different. It depends. That example, though, I think I'm going to include an example of how to handle that in a reference implementation of how I'm doing authentication, authorization with a session store and gateway, and that reference pattern that I've been talking a lot about. Let me get one of those out the door and see if I can show you a good example of how to handle that. Is RDBC not going mainstream? Most companies use RDS, and none of the reactive drivers support IAM authentication. That's a good question.
Yeah, did not know that.
RDBC is, I think it's mainstream. I think it's doing its thing.
For sure. Yep.
But yeah, I think the IAM authentication for what I'm doing, that's a real kind of deep dive. because the client that's authenticating against whatever backend store, usually it's the client's authentication that we care about. So I might handle that IAM authentication above the client. So that I'm passing that in. Hey, this user, I'm the client. This user is making this request or this create or update or whatever, and passing that along. That's a pattern I've seen. So I have that audit trail, but I don't think I want a bunch of authenticated clients connecting at a user level that I'm going to be authenticating against some backend IAM. Again, at scale, that's probably going to cause a lot of problems. If on every write, I'm authenticating with some IAM service, that could be a real problem. You're not going to get 1,000 writes per minute with a system like that. We love you too.
Thanks, yes, Thank you, Jay.
Hello, Mohammed. We're trying to wrap up today. We appreciate you all. It's just great questions today. ChatGPT is kind of good. Writing tests with provided service methods. Yes, it is a definite plus. Keep up the good work, you guys. Should conduct at least 2 sessions a week. I agree. Let's see if we can get Dan to free up some of his busy calendar. It's not just busy building content for you guys, but he's traveling all over the world. And I'm working really hard to find some time in his calendar to add one more session. We have a reactive app, previously using reactive Cassandra on CF, now moving it to EKS, RDS, but can't use R2DBC. I'm going to add, I actually just yesterday pushed out a little example of using Spring Boot 3, the native compilation, to run your application workloads on CF. You should take a look at it. Big, massive benefits for those existing CF workloads without having to change a whole lot of code or your foundation infrastructure. It's a great option. You can use problem detail class to return an error message. Absolutely.
Yep. Spring Boot.
Finish reading Spring in Action book. Yay! And no, everyone is telling me to practice creating random projects, but I feel like it's doing homework without solutions. You can take any one of these projects, any one of the questions that you've heard here, and you can actually be a Spring Developer Advocate. Contribute a solution on the questions that we've that are being asked in our show. And you can take that right back to your GitHub repository, and you're not doing homework without any solution. You're providing help to somebody else in the community.
Better yet, if you don't feel like doing some random project that doesn't serve you in any way, find a problem you're having. Maybe you can't keep track of your tasks that you work on every week. Create a program that tracks these tasks for you. Do something to solve one of the problems that you're having in your life, and do it in Spring, and do it in build an API, build a front end for it. These are things, we talked about building our own blogs early on in our career. This was a problem, but it got us like building something tangible that we were going to use, that we felt like proud of doing. So I would say, anything that you can do to kind of contribute to problems that you're facing or things that you want to use in your day-to-day work, that would really help out.
Coding Cloud, thank you so much for coming to the show. Give me an example. Post what you can, if you can, to a GitHub repo or some guests, and share it with us, and I'll try to take a look at that off stream. Thanks everybody for joining us today. This has been a wonderful session. Man, time flies. I've got to jump. I do have to go to another meeting. This has been wonderful. If you like the show, if you'd like some stickers from the show, our little stickers, I am sending them out.
Nice.
Some Spring Office Hours stickers. Send your email or send an email to stickers@springofficehours.io and just give me your address. Anywhere in the world, I'll send it to you, and then look for an email response and letting you know it's on the way.
And then if we didn't get to your questions today, please, here's our Twitter handles up there on screen. Please go ahead and find us on Twitter, email us, yell at us outside of our house if you're near us. Just let us know what questions you're facing. We will get those questions. Like I said, I have a mailbag full of questions that we want to get to. So that will be next week's episode, which is going to be a mailbag episode. We'll just answer more questions. And as long as you guys keep coming with questions, then we can just keep doing this every week. So feel free to go ahead and get those to us.
Yep. And in the meantime, don't forget to check out the Golden Path to Spring One. I'll throw the URL in the chat. And with that, thank you so much for coming. We hope to see you again on the next episode. Bring your questions. We appreciate you all. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.